Everyone, I'm just going to make a few brief opening remarks before handing over to the panel to have a discussion around delivering the road transport breakthrough, priority international actions needed. So welcome to the session. I'm delighted to open. I was part of the team that wrote this report together with the IRENA and the IEA on the request of the parties from COP26. So I'm sorry, I represent the high-level champions team. Angie Farag-Thibault, I'm part of the high-level champions team looking after road transport. And it's been a real pleasure to work with IRENA, IEA, and the rest of the team here on this report that covered road transport and some of the other sectors in the breakthroughs agenda. The purpose of it and why the parties asked for this report was to really help them to, having reflected on the breakthroughs agenda, what to do next. Identifying the key priorities, identifying the key metrics that need to be tracked, and also understanding who's working in this space, what initiatives should they be aware of and working with. So that report was launched in New York during New York Climate Week, and since then, up to COP27, the report was reflected on by parties and by initiatives to decide on who was going to work on what and what commitments could they make behind the priority action areas. And I believe this panel is going to be reflecting on some of that today and sharing more about that. It was a tricky process. It was really a lot of work, but it was really worthwhile. I think coming into this COP27, we can see that it really helped to articulate what are the key priorities of this sector and how are we already working together. And how can we communicate that and get buy-in for it to actually very much make the progress that we need to over the next year and the next year, etc., to 2030. It identifies the key coordination gains that are needed between parties, between countries and down to the cities level and with the private sector. And we've identified 6 priority areas for this sector. I think one other reason why it's really important to have a report like this is between the COP processes, like when you're briefing the next presidency, it was actually something that we went through this morning and to explain a little bit more about a complicated sector with many companies, big value chain involved, lots of initiatives. It was a great way for us to just be very specific and say, these are 6 areas we need to work on. We need to work on together to go faster. These are some initiatives which are working on these areas, and these are some of the gaps that we need to work on. And it helped us tell a great narrative, and I think it's something that we can really get behind and work on in the coming years together. It will be tracked annually going forward, and that's also great. And with the metrics, we'll be able to see how we're doing and how we can do better by identifying more action areas. So I'll just close on reminding everybody the 6 action areas that were defined. And you'll know that we came up with it in a very diplomatic process. If you think about it, we're looking at really cars, vans, trucks, buses, all of them, and trying to consolidate what do we need in each of those sectors that really needs the coordination gains between countries to accelerate. So we settled on demand creation and long-term vision for priority area 1, getting a vision and alignment behind the phase-out dates and the milestones that will be needed to really get there in a concrete way. The second one is finance and investment, making sure there's really strong best practice sharing, coordinated best practice sharing to mobilize investment and accelerate that investment in infrastructure in particular, and with a focus on emerging markets to make sure this is a just transition. The third on harmonizing standards for the battery supply chain, making sure that there's sustainability and accountability is integral to this process. Fourthly, on infrastructure again, alignment, harmonization on charging standards, interoperability is going to be key to making sure that we don't get stuck along the way, and making sure there's best practice sharing on technology choices to help accelerate some of those nitty-gritty issues and accelerate that deployment. Number 5 is around trade conditions. So we know that there'll be obviously a big second-hand market as we renew the fleets. And how do we make sure that we can avoid vehicle dumping and improve efficiency standards throughout the world in the shortest space of time possible? And lastly, The group will really want to look at making sure we continue to, on an annual basis, consolidate and review the landscape of initiatives and keep on coordinating that to look at, are there gaps? Are we working on the right issues? What further support do we need? Where could we partner up better? So I think that gives you a little bit of an overview. It's been great to be involved. I'd love to hear more from those that are going to be involved in now taking this agenda forward and how we can continue to work together to accelerate the transition. So thank you very much. I hand over to Elizabeth.
Thank you, and I think we have a video first to show, and then we start the panel.
Our one planet is changing in front of our eyes. Blink, and it will be too late to save it. To protect and restore the natural world and secure humanity's future, we must halve global emissions by 2030. To achieve this, international collaboration is vital. Last year at COP26, 45 world leaders committed to the Breakthrough Agenda, an unprecedented worldwide plan to dramatically speed up the development and deployment of key clean technologies. Covering 5 sectors that together represent more than 50% of global emissions, the Breakthrough Agenda aims to make clean technology attractive, accessible, and affordable to all. To limit warming to 1.5 degrees, we need to reduce global emissions 5 times faster than we have over the last decade. We already have many of the technologies needed to transition to a 1.5 degree future. However, we need to go much further and much faster so no one is left behind. The global energy crisis underlines the urgency of increasing the affordability and accessibility of our power. Alongside this, the current global food emergency and extreme weather events have shown just how important it is to collaborate and future-proof essential industries. Real progress has been made since COP26, but the world remains far off track to limit the worst impacts of climate change. The Breakthrough Agenda report helps set the direction. We now need to respond by COP27, deliver priority projects, hold ourselves to account, and ensure collaboration is sustained and expanded every year for the benefit of everyone. Delivering the pace of change requires continued effort at every level of government and throughout the private sector. Securing the future we all want is possible. We must not let it slip through our fingers.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, perfect. Now it works. Well, let me introduce myself first. I'm Elizabeth Windisch from the International Transport Forum. We are a transport policy think tank where we work with 64 member countries around the globe that are represented with us by the Ministries of Transport and Infrastructure. And I have the pleasure today to moderate this panel. Thank you for this invitation also, and thank you for putting such a great panel together, which will explore the breakthrough goal in the road transport sector, which was defined at COP26, and what is needed in terms of international collaboration to make this breakthrough goal a reality. Just to recap, I think Angie has made a perfect introduction, the video said it again, but the aim is actually to make zero-emission vehicles the new normal by 2030, and this across the globe and across all vehicle categories. So obviously this seems like a big challenge, which will require a lot of collaboration on a national level in terms of across the different ministries, across the whole value chain, but also internationally. And Angie has provided some guidelines, the priority actions that have been defined in the Breakthrough Agenda, and we will explore this a bit further, what this actually means in practice for a signatory country, but also for supporting initiatives. So we have a panel here today that represents the different actors. We have Professor Dr. Klaus Bonhoff from the Federal Ministry of Transport, Digital and Transport in Germany, where he is the Director General for Policy Issues. we have Oskar Skrt from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, where she leads the global decarbonizing transportation efforts. We have Tim Dahlmann, representative from the International Council for Clean Transportation, where he works on the agenda of zero-emission vehicles. And we have representative from Karlstad, Cristiano Fasagna, where he drives the work on the decarbonization of trucks specifically and leads the Drive to Zero program there, delivered by Karlstad. So let me first start off with Tim, maybe. I know that the ICCT plays, and I think we all know the ICCT is a very big player in the zero-emission vehicle sector, obviously. So the ICCT plays a crucial role for driving the actions required for achieving the road transport breakthrough. Can you maybe explain what you're doing concretely, maybe what you have done already, what you're planning concretely to do in the year 2023, and maybe also beyond, if you have already the things in the mid-term, let's say to 2030 in planning? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the UK for hosting this event today. My pleasure to be here representing the ICCT. So the ICCT is privileged to be involved in many ZEV partnerships. So we are the Secretariat for the International Zero Emission Vehicles Alliance. We contribute actively to the Zero Emission Vehicles Transition Council, and we are now the Secretariat of the newly launched Accelerating to Zero Coalition. So in my role at the ICCT, I'm the program lead of our international partnerships program, which encompasses all of these different partnerships. About half my job is explaining to my colleagues what each of these partnerships do and how they are differentiated from each other. But I wanted to start there because I think that it just shows the growth in the space and how there's now many different initiatives all operating with a common goal to accelerate the transition to zero-emission vehicles, and are contributing in different ways and leading in different aspects. So I think that ties directly to the breakthrough agenda and the idea of aligning initiatives with the key priority actions that have been identified through the breakthrough process. So I just wanted to start kind of with one of our partnerships as an example of how international collaboration amongst governments has really progressed over time. So I mentioned the International Zero Emissions Vehicle Alliance, which is a group of 21 governments that was formed in 2015. The government shared the common goal of trying to move towards 100% zero-emission fleets as quickly as possible. And back in 2015, there was a lot of uncertainty about what that pace would look like. The technology was not where it is today. The price of vehicles, infrastructure was not where it is today. And sales were, as it's up today, about 500,000 EV sales per year globally. Since then, in the last 7 years, global sales have expanded 20-fold to 10.5 million, as we learned from BNEF's presentation earlier today. And we've had this expansion of the initiatives that are working in this space. So I think the breakthrough agenda process was really valuable in trying to differentiate amongst these initiatives and align them behind a common agenda. So in my role here today, I wanted to talk to two specific priority action items that were identified in the agenda. So the first action item of trying to develop a long-term vision and align governments behind that, and then the priority action for accelerating infrastructure deployment. So on the subject of long-term vision, I think that that's a really important one. I think now it's fairly clear where we need to be. Broadly speaking, an ambitious electrification scenario that would align us with the Paris Agreement goals would have about 100% of new sales of 2- and 3-wheelers and urban buses, zero-emission vehicles by 2030, 100% sales of new cars and vans, zero-emission by 2035, and 100% sales of new trucks, zero-emission by 2040. So I think now we have several initiatives, so the ZEV Declaration and the Global MOU, that align country and other signatories at a pace of electrification that aligns with these science-based targets. So I think we've reached a very important step where there's a lot of momentum building through the signatories to these different initiatives that's really setting the scale of the ambition. So I think moving forward through the Accelerating to Zero Coalition, we aim to continue to try to grow that group of signatories, grow that group of governments, businesses and other stakeholders who are aligning behind that ambition, and really add in a new element of implementation. I think that's where kind of now that we have momentum building, it's all about, okay, how do we actually implement policies, make investments that are aligning with this pace of ambition, pace of electrification that we're seeking to achieve. So I think kind of one thing I wanted to mention here today that I would encourage the authors of the next iteration of the Breakthrough Agenda is to consider what are those policies that we can include as priority actions in order to take a step forward on the implementation. So things like greenhouse gas standards, ZEV regulations, the policies that are needed by governments to really kind of follow up to the target setting with actual concrete policies and binding commitments to those targets. So the second piece I'll speak about is the infrastructure piece. So again, a really important aspect of the transition. We can sell as many EVs as we want, but if we have no way to charge them, then it's not going to get us to where we need to go. So this year, the ICCT supported the Zero Emission Vehicle Transition Council with some research looking at, for the 17 member governments of the ZEV-TC, what the pace and scale of infrastructure development would need to be in order to match an ambitious electrification scenario. And through that analysis, we found that for the 17 member governments, they would need collectively about 100 million charging stations installed by 2030 in order to meet an accelerated electrification pace. And we looked at how much of that infrastructure is installed today, and we found that only 13% of that needed infrastructure is actually in the ground as of mid-2020-2022. So there's a lot that needs to be done, and that's just 17 mostly leading governments in the space. So if we think about globally what we need, there's a huge challenge to take the positive steps now to develop roadmaps, to get investments in place, and to start the infrastructure build out to match the pace of ambition that's being set by these commitments. So in 2023, the ZEV Transition Council has included infrastructure as a key priority action item for the council to take forward and work on in collaboration and alignment with the priority areas. We're still developing the specifics of that work plan, but it will involve working groups of governments, other initiatives, and other stakeholders to align behind kind of developing a global vision of infrastructure build out, what will be needed, and what are the needs now in order to get countries started to get to that goal. So I'll leave it there, and thank you.
Thank you. So very concrete action items for two of the priority items that were defined by the Breakthrough Agenda in terms of, in the context of international collaboration. Thank you. Maybe let's move now to Klaus for a country perspective. So Germany has signed up to the Breakthrough Agenda at COP26. Can you maybe let us know why that was, and also why you have been so very actively engaged in the process since, I believe. So what are the benefits that you see to be part of this process?
I guess one of the key words has already been mentioned, which is cooperation and collaboration when it comes to manage the massive transformation we're in. We're talking about a transformation not only in the automotive sector, we're talking about the transformation of the mobility sector as a whole. And in that transformation, it is important to understand what others are doing, to learn one from the other, and also to sometimes reflect what you're doing yourself. So that discussion on a global scale helps quite a bit. The other part of the big transformation we're in, and that was very obvious and is still very obvious in these times this year, is the changing of the energy system, the increased energy prices that we're seeing. So we indeed need to take into account not only the massive and rapid decarbonization, but also words like diversification and resilience are playing a major role as well. So here again, it will be important to understand how other markets, other economies handle these kind of topics. And when we agree with the fact that zero-emission vehicles will need to become the new normal, we need to look at the challenges that we have in that context. They are the largest lever, there's no doubt about that, to reduce CO2 in the transportation sector. When we say zero-emission vehicles, we consider battery electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles. We also, from a well-to-wheel perspective, see a role for synthetic fuels based on renewables. So that is part of the discussion as well that we need to have, especially when we look at the diversification part. And let me highlight 2 points. One is infrastructure, it was mentioned already, but really building infrastructure to support massive ramp up of battery electric vehicles does require the individual charging poles, but it requires renewable energy to go into that. It requires interoperability. It requires to understand what the customer is actually doing with the vehicle, and who are those customers in future in a shared economy, and in these kind of changes of business models that we will see. And the other infrastructure that we're supporting is hydrogen stations, where again the question will be how to provide them with green energy, where to plan for them, where to find the timing in between public role, private investment. So we are into all these questions of financing and investments as well when we come to building up the infrastructure. On a European scale, we will see the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation, which will mandate the European member states to build recharging infrastructure and hydrogen stations. That will also set some standards when it comes to interoperability. So, all that are these things that we're dealing with nationally in our responsibility in Germany, but we do want to learn and want to understand and want to discuss with others how they're doing it. And last remark is on supply chain. We do have a target in Germany to have 15 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030. That would be roughly 1/3 of the overall fleet that we have in Germany. For heavy duty, we have a target of 1/3 of our transportation needs in heavy duty needs to be electric or powered with power-based fuels. So we need to support that ramp up, not only from an infrastructure point of view, but also from a raw materials point of view, from a supply chain point of view, from the whole industrial base that is behind that. So this is something that we need to take into account. We need to look into obviously recycling concepts, but a lot of other things as well. So there's homework for everybody, and we need these kind of initiatives to make sure that we're on the same page.
Perfect, thank you. You have touched on the infrastructure, and I think one of the things that you have not mentioned that we have been looking at the International Transport Forum though a lot, and always take Germany as a case study example, the infrastructure of electric road systems, where I think Germany is quite leading in the development and trials to see that work. And not only this infrastructure, but all infrastructure should be interoperable with neighboring countries, and this is obviously particularly important for Germany, I guess, given that it is a country surrounded by many other countries and loads of traffic will go in and out of Germany. So digital and recharging infrastructure will have to be connected. So the collaboration action item is particularly relevant for such countries, of European countries specifically, I would say. Now, maybe going to the business perspective, Urshka, you connect 200 companies and work with them to make the zero economy a reality in the future. Can you let us know what you're doing specifically in terms of the road transport breakthrough? And I've heard earlier today that the WBCSD is specifically engaging also with emerging economies, so maybe you can highlight your work there specifically. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. As you said, the World Business Council works with more than 200 businesses to achieve system transformation for 3 objectives: net zero, nature positive, and equitable transition. Now, in terms of transport, along with, of course, the supply chain challenges, circularity, and the carbon transparency, in the transport decarbonization, we see that zero-emission vehicles are one of the key technologies to achieve the 1.5 degrees scenario. And the key challenges that we identified in this transition is especially how to enable this transition is global and equitable. This challenge brings, of course, the need to increase the deployment of sustainable charging infrastructure globally. We know that different markets will face different challenges in regards to that, and also how to make sure that we can leverage the capital to ensure that we can deploy this infrastructure in time. What is important to note is that, of course, as a business community, we see that the importance of working closely with the governments and also with, when it comes to the emerging market, with development banks, on how we can scale up investments and achieve, again, the deployment of technologies for zero-emission vehicles. As you mentioned, we just announced an hour ago a very exciting initiative that we are launching together with the US government, the UK government, under the ZVTC structure, that is gathering businesses that are interested and committed to invest in emerging markets and collaborate with the governments to align on the roadmaps and enable the environments that would allow for the deployment of these technologies and realization of the committed investments. So maybe I just want to name some of the companies as I have the opportunity. So this is Arcadis, Deutsche Post DHL, Fifth Wall, SR Energisa, Grab, Hitachi, Honda, KPMG, Lisplan, LinkedIn, and Uber. So these are now the champions, and the plan is with them to organize dialogues with the governments to come with collaborative agreements on the COP28.
Perfect, thank you so much. A great example of international and, well, a collaboration also across businesses. Now, Cristiano, you work at Karlstad, as I said. You launched at COP26 a memorandum of understanding for zero-emission vehicle trucks. Could you maybe let us know what that contained, what it is, and what your plans for the future in order to drive this even further, maybe, at Karlstad?
No, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, and thank the UK government for organizing this. So last year it was a very big moment, like at COP26, where we announced together with the government of the Netherlands this global agreement, which we call the Global MOU, which align leading nations around 100% sales of new trucks and buses being zero emissions by 2040, and an intermediate target of 30% sales by 2030. Right? So back then, 15 nations aligned their ambition, like including like the UK was part of them, and the Netherlands as well, and many other countries across most continents worldwide. And then today we had the pleasure to make new country announcements to this global MOU. Like, so 9 new nations like joined. So now we are up to 25 nations, like including the United States. So that was one key signatory today. And it's an important thing is that this is not about only government ambition. Right? So 70 businesses also align around the same ambition, manufacturers, infrastructure providers, fleets. And that is really important because this is not only government like leading the way, but industry supporting like as well. So the important thing around the global MOU is that through this past year, we've been supporting all these leading countries on how to move from commitment to action. So how to execute the global MOU. So we've identified like key policies. They're very consistent. We've partnered very closely with ICCT, so really aligned. But the importance to have very ambitious targets for different types of applications to get really specific, like about them. The second one, strong regulations. They provide a lot of market certainty for the industry to invest. And then back that up with strong incentives, like as well, to accelerate the TCO parity and really to enable the early introduction of these regulations. We've talked a lot about infrastructure, right? So moving these infrastructure investments, really key, but also invest in other types of demand policies, such as zero emission zones. Right, so really important like aspects here And so thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. In theory, we need to close already within the next 2 minutes, but since we started late, I take just the opportunity to pretend that I was given more time to be able to ask one more question to each of you to kind of round up not only this session, but maybe the day, the solutions day, which was half day this afternoon was dedicated to transport in the presidency program. I'm sure that many of you, all of you have attended events of this before. Can you give us, very short, a comment on what makes you hopeful that the breakthrough aim in road transport will be achieved, specifically the making zero-emission vehicles to 2030 the new normal? What have you heard today or in the past days on this that makes you hopeful? But if you want to end on a negative note, you can also say what maybe does not make you hopeful. It's up to you if you want to end on a positive or negative note. And maybe I just go from left to right for my order. Klaus, please.
Well, I had the chance today to attend this dialogue where it was about sustainable urban transportation, specifically in the Global South. So it was, to me, really a good learning experience to see how sometimes different the challenges are due to different economies, due to different mindsets, but in the end we're talking about the same challenges when we talk about ramp up, when we talk about infrastructure, when we talk about financing, finding global solutions there. And I am always optimistic, but I kind of got out of that session thinking that we all have our part to play and everybody has that sense of urgency by now. Also, I attended a session today that we had in our German pavilion on public transport. So how do we get more people motivated to use modes of transport that are less carbon intensive? And when we talk about public transport, obviously it will have to be zero emission. There is no doubt about that. So again, that sense of urgency is there. Let's continue to work together. Thank you.
Yeah, we just reinforce all the great work that also ZVTC have done with bringing together all the international partners. And I think we have achieved kind of a good level of alignment of what are the key priorities and where we have to go next. As you mentioned, the infrastructure, the financing, support to the Global South, but also considering different transport modes. So I think this is like the highlight for me.
I would end with a response of cautious optimism. I think one of the key things I saw today was that we're on pace to break EV sales records for cars and vans this year, even despite all of the challenges we faced with the energy crisis, with the war in Ukraine. EVs are still developing, building momentum. But what I've also seen is that there's a lot of work to be done. So we have a long ways to go. It's great that these conversations are happening, that the momentum is building, that we have new commitments in place. But I think now is the time where we need to get the vehicles on the roads, get the charging infrastructures in the ground, and start the implementation. So I think kind of the theme of the COP being implementation is very much aligned with my key takeaways that we need to start moving now.
Yeah. So I think my perspective is similar to Tim. I think there's a lot of hope, but we also need to be very realistic. So when we think in terms of electric trucks and buses, the amazing thing that we have today, right, is that we have a lot of clarity in terms of technologies, right? If you think like 5 years ago, people would even question, is this even real? Is this going to work? That is no longer the case, right? So that is the amazing thing. We have very strong barriers still to overcome. Like vehicle supply is a major barrier. Like to think in terms of how fast the market will have to scale up, the numbers are tremendous, but the opportunities are also like as well. So finance, like another major barrier, right? The TCO parity might be expected, but the capital costs are still going to be higher, right? And the third one, the infrastructure, right? We still have very minimal levels of infrastructure out there. So major infrastructure build up. But the important thing here, the same way that we have very strong clarity in terms of technologies, we have very strong clarity in terms of the barriers and the solutions to overcome these barriers.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I would leave it here. I think you have wrapped it up very nicely with a hope, but also some realism in terms of still a lot of work to be done. I would come to a close here. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much on behalf of the UK, but I think we have a person here who is much more in a better place to thank you on behalf of the UK. It's the UK Minister for Climate and Energy. Please, for your closing remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and thank you all for attending this event or watching it online. I know that the panel will have shared their insights into the importance of the road transport priority international actions today, and to hear more about how collaboration, which I think is as well as implementation, it's collaboration, I think is the other big theme, isn't it? Through the breakthrough framework will enable a faster, easier and cheaper transition for all. And we just heard in, I think, the final contribution there, just how big a challenge it is, and that's why the collaboration, again, is so important. The UK is proud to have co-convened the road transport breakthrough alongside NITI Aayog in India and the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States. And we're proud, too, to note the enormous progress towards our road transport goals this year. The transition to ZEVs has really accelerated. About 96 million new cars, trucks and buses are expected to be added to the global fleet in 2022. And in the UK, we're going further and faster to decarbonise transport by phasing out the sale of new petrol and diesel cars and vans by 2030. And from 2035, all new cars and vans must be zero emissions at the tailpipe. But just as our challenge is global, so our approach, as I've said, must be collaborative. We'll only succeed in stepping up to the plate if we do so together, moving further and faster to deliver real results for countries and communities around the world. And that's why our priority actions are so important. I'd like to highlight three priority areas that I think are crucial to deliver in the coming year, in 2023. Firstly, we must agree a date to end the sale of all internal combustion engine vehicles. Must agree a date on that. It's the only way to channel investment towards truly zero emissions technologies and deliver on the pace of change that we've just heard about, and to create the economy of scale which we will need successfully to deliver the transformative transition to electric. The ZEV Declaration, alongside other important initiatives like the First Movers Coalition and the Global MOU on medium and heavy-duty vehicles, led by the Netherlands and CalStart, will support us in achieving that. But there's a long way to go, and that's why today I launched the transition of the ZEV Declaration from last year's COP into the Accelerating to Zero Coalition, a partnership of leading initiatives in this space which will work together to secure more commitments to transition. I was delighted to see Spain and France be the newest countries to join this coalition, and I look forward to welcoming others in 2023. But of course, it's not just about the cars themselves. We need collective agreement to scale up the deployment of infrastructure. Taking on our charging challenges is vital to the global transition to ZEVs. So we also look forward to working with the international community over the coming year ahead of COP28 to pool resources and develop a clear global vision for how we can build the kind of infrastructure we need to boost the breakthrough. And finally, we've got to support emerging and developing economies to ensure that the transition is truly global. And earlier today, alongside partners, I launched the initial support package for emerging markets and developing economies to help accelerate a more equitable transition to ZEVs. If we are to ensure a worldwide transition, where ZEVs are the new normal in all markets by 2030, we must focus our efforts on mobilizing financial and technical support to drive the shift. Taken together, along with a focus on building sustainable supply chains and second-hand markets, we mustn't ever forget them, this package of specific, urgent and time-bound actions represents a clear plan for coordinated international action to accelerate the ZEV transition through to COP28 and COP29 for the benefit of all. So I'd like to thank all the panellists again for their contributions, and to the countries and initiatives who have agreed to lead this important work. And I would now like to invite everyone to join us in a ZEV reception to close the day, where we'll be joined by Envision Racing Team. There'll be drinks available. I'm told we've even managed to source a corkscrew, understandably from the French pavilion. I imagine they had plenty spare. And the sober British are finally letting their hair down. There'll be drinks available, and I'll be discussing the importance of technological advances in motorsports and how they're helping accelerate the global transition to ZEVs. So I look forward to working with you all to progress this exciting work in 2023, and I think all of you can be very proud of the role that you've played in taking us to this point so far. Thank you all very much indeed.